the revenge wasn't just complete. It was absolute. Just 2 months after suffering one of the most painful defeats of her young career, Alex Eala stood on the grass of Bad Homburg and delivered a response that nobody saw coming. The woman who had crushed her in Madrid was now the one searching for answers. Elise Mertens had beaten Eala every time they had faced each other. Their most recent meeting had been particularly brutal. Back in April at the Madrid Open, the Belgian veteran dismantled the Filipina 6-2, 6-1 in just over an hour, exposing every weakness and reminding the tennis world how far Eala still had to climb. But tennis changes quickly. And Alex Eala was no longer the same player. On June 22, 2026, under the evening skies of Bad Homburg, the 21-year-old Filipina produced one of the most convincing victories of her career, defeating Mertens 6-2, 6-4 and sending a powerful message to the rest of the WTA Tour. This wasn't simply revenge. It was validation. Validation that her stunning run in Berlin was real. Validation that her rise into the world's top 30 was no accident. And validation that she was becoming a genuine threat heading into Wimbledon. As Eala left the court, the conversation immediately shifted. Fans weren't asking whether she belonged among the elite anymore. They were asking something far more dangerous. Could she become the dark horse nobody wanted to face at Wimbledon? The answer may have started in Bad Homburg. Just 24 hours earlier, Eala had seen her dream run at the Berlin Open come to an end. A semi-final defeat to Linda Noskova prevented her from reaching the biggest final of her career. For many young players, such a loss could have triggered disappointment. Instead, it ignited something else. Confidence. The Berlin campaign had already transformed her season. She had defeated some of the most respected names on tour, climbed to a career-high ranking, and secured a piece of Filipino tennis history by becoming the first Filipina player to earn a seeded position at Wimbledon. But there was still unfinished business waiting for her. Across the net stood Elise Mertens. A proven veteran. A former top 15 player. A competitor who knew exactly how to expose inexperience. And perhaps most importantly, a player who had never lost to Alex Eala. The numbers favored Mertens. The history favored Mertens. The experience favored Mertens. Yet from the opening moments, it became clear that something had changed. Something significant. The first serve of the match felt different. The movement looked different. The confidence looked different. This wasn't the player Mertens had dominated in Madrid. This was a player arriving with momentum, belief, and a growing reputation as one of the hottest names in women's tennis. Point after point, Eala took control. The left-handed angles that had already troubled some of the world's biggest stars during her Berlin breakthrough once again became a nightmare for her opponent. Mertens expected the patterns she had seen months earlier. Instead, she found herself facing a completely evolved version of Alex Eala. And that realization would soon change everything. As the match progressed, the difference between Madrid and Bad Homburg became impossible to ignore. In Spain, Elise Mertens had controlled every aspect of the contest. In Germany, Alex Eala was the one dictating the terms. The Belgian's powerful ground strokes, which had overwhelmed Eala just weeks earlier, suddenly looked ordinary. Time after time, the Filipina absorbed the pace, redirected the ball into uncomfortable positions, and forced Mertens into mistakes she rarely makes. What impressed observers most wasn't the shot-making. It was the movement. Eala looked completely at home on grass. Every slide. Every adjustment. Every recovery step. She seemed to arrive at the ball a fraction of a second earlier than expected, taking away Mertens' favorite patterns and forcing the veteran into increasingly risky decisions. With every point won, the energy inside the stadium grew louder. Philippine flags danced throughout the stands. The chants became impossible to ignore. Laban! Laban! The support echoed across Bad Homburg, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a home match than a tournament in Germany. And Eala fed off every second of it. The opening set quickly turned into a statement performance. An early break gave her control. A series of confident service holds tightened her grip. Meanwhile, Mertens looked increasingly frustrated. The woman who had beaten Eala twice before suddenly had no clear answers. No way to slow the momentum. No way to stop the pressure. Point after point, Eala pushed forward. Then came the moment that perfectly summarized the set. At set point, she stepped into a backhand and fired it straight toward the sideline. The ball clipped the line. Winner. Game. Set. 6-2. For anyone who remembered Madrid, the scoreline carried extra meaning. Just months earlier, Mertens had handed Eala that exact score. Now the tennis world was witnessing a complete reversal of fortunes. But the match wasn't over. And champions rarely disappear quietly. The second set brought Mertens' response. The Belgian veteran raised her level, fighting to stay alive in the contest. She challenged Eala's service games more aggressively and attempted to disrupt the rhythm that had carried the Filipina through the first set. For a brief moment, the pressure shifted. When Mertens battled back to level the score, some wondered if experience would finally take over. After all, this was a player with multiple WTA titles and years of experience on the biggest stages in tennis. Yet Eala never blinked. No panic. No frustration. No signs of doubt. Instead, she produced what may have been the most impressive sequence of the entire match. Immediately after surrendering momentum, she took it right back. Her shot selection became even sharper. Her court positioning became even more aggressive. And when the opportunity arrived, she attacked without hesitation. The breakback was immediate. The statement was unmistakable. Alex Eala was not leaving this court without victory. Serving for the match, she displayed the composure of a seasoned champion. Every point felt calculated. Every shot carried purpose. And then came the final moment. The point that ended the contest. The serve exploded down the center line. Fast. Precise. Untouchable. Mertens barely reacted. Her racket never came close. Ace. Game. Match. In just over 80 minutes, the impossible had become reality. Alex Eala had defeated Elise Mertens for the first time in her career. She had erased the memories of Madrid. She had avenged one of the most painful losses of her season. And perhaps most importantly, she had proven that her recent success was no accident. This was no temporary hot streak. This was no lucky run. This was the arrival of a player rapidly becoming one of the most dangerous names in women's tennis. And when analysts began examining the numbers after the match, the story became even more remarkable. Because the scoreboard only revealed part of what had happened. The statistics revealed something far more frightening. A player whose confidence was growing with every match. A player whose game was evolving at an astonishing speed. And a player who appeared to be peaking at exactly the right moment, just days before Wimbledon. And if anyone still believed this victory was simply another good day at the office, the statistics told a very different story. What happened in Bad Homburg wasn't just a win. It was domination. The kind of performance that forces analysts to stop talking about potential and start talking about reality. On grass courts, service games are sacred. One loose game can change an entire match. One missed first serve can shift momentum instantly. Yet throughout the contest, Alex Eala looked almost untouchable. Her first serve became a weapon. A shield. And at times, an outright statement of intent. She won the overwhelming majority of points behind that delivery and faced pressure only briefly. On the rare occasions Mertens created opportunities, Eala responded like a veteran who had been playing on the biggest stages for years. No hesitation. No nerves. Just execution. The most telling moments came on the biggest points. Twice, Mertens earned break opportunities. Twice, Eala erased them immediately. Both times with fearless serving that left the Belgian frozen in place. Those weren't simply points won. Those were moments that revealed how much Eala had grown. Because talent can win matches. But handling pressure wins championships. And for perhaps the first time, tennis fans were beginning to see signs of both. The baseline battle told an even more astonishing story. This was supposed to be Mertens' territory. The Belgian had built her career on consistency, discipline, and forcing opponents into mistakes. But against Eala, the script completely unraveled. The longer rallies became, the more dangerous the Filipina looked. She attacked relentlessly. She changed direction effortlessly. And she repeatedly forced Mertens into uncomfortable positions. Every exchange seemed to end the same way. Either Eala found an opening and struck. Or Mertens broke down under the pressure. By the final point, the difference wasn't just visible on the scoreboard. It was visible in the body language. The confidence. The energy. The belief. One player looked like she was searching for answers. The other looked like she had discovered something special. Which raises an important question. Why was this victory so significant? The answer goes far beyond a single match. First, there was the revenge factor. Athletes rarely admit it publicly, but certain losses stay with them. Certain defeats become personal. And Madrid was undoubtedly one of those defeats for Alex Eala. The scoreline had been brutal. The feeling afterward even worse. For weeks, that match represented a painful reminder of the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be. Now, standing on a grass court in Germany, she had completely rewritten the story. The player who once dominated her was now the player being dominated. The psychological significance of that cannot be overstated. Second, there was the momentum. Great runs can sometimes be dismissed as lucky. One upset can be explained away. Two can be questioned. But when victories continue piling up against elite opposition, excuses begin to disappear. And that's exactly what was happening. Match after match, Eala was proving that her breakthrough wasn't temporary. It wasn't a fortunate draw. It wasn't a one-week phenomenon. It was real. The wins were becoming too consistent. The performances too convincing. The confidence too visible. And then came the third reason. Perhaps the most important of all. Growth. Because the most dangerous players in tennis aren't necessarily the most talented. They're the ones improving faster than everyone else. That's what made this performance so frightening for the rest of the tour. The Alex Eala who walked off the court in Madrid looked vulnerable. The Alex Eala who walked off the court in Bad Homburg looked transformed. Stronger physically. Sharper mentally. More aggressive tactically. And far more confident in the biggest moments. That evolution may be the biggest story of all. Following the match, even Mertens couldn't hide her admiration. There was no controversy. No excuses. No complaints about conditions. Only respect. Because sometimes an opponent simply plays too well. And on this particular day, that's exactly what happened. The veteran recognized it. The crowd recognized it. The tennis world recognized it. Alex Eala hadn't merely won. She had delivered a warning. A warning to every player preparing for Wimbledon. A warning to every seed hoping to avoid dangerous early-round opponents. And a warning to anyone still underestimating the young Filipina. As she left the court, fans rose to their feet. Philippine flags waved proudly in the evening air. The chants echoed throughout the venue one final time. And while the official result would be remembered as another victory, many believed something much bigger had happened. Because this felt less like the end of a match. And more like the beginning of a serious Wimbledon threat. The revenge story was over. But the larger story? That story was only just beginning. The final point had barely touched the grass before the reaction began. Then came the explosion. Within minutes, social media platforms were flooded with clips, highlights, celebrations, and one question that seemed to be everywhere. Has Alex Eala just become one of the biggest threats heading into Wimbledon? What started as a strong victory quickly transformed into a global conversation. Across the Philippines, fans poured onto social media to celebrate another historic milestone. Many couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Not because Eala had won. But because of how she had won. This wasn't a dramatic three-set escape. This wasn't an upset fueled by luck. This was control. This was dominance. This was a player taking apart an opponent who had previously beaten her with ease. One fan wrote that the result felt like watching a completely different athlete from the one who stepped onto the court in Madrid. Another described the performance as the moment Eala officially arrived among the sports elite. Others focused on the bigger picture. Just days earlier, many observers were still debating whether her remarkable run on grass was sustainable. Now those doubts were beginning to disappear. The reactions became increasingly emotional. Fans who had followed her journey from the junior ranks to the professional tour described the victory as one of the most satisfying moments of her career. Not because it delivered a trophy, but because it delivered redemption. For many supporters, this wasn't simply another win on the schedule. It was the closing of a chapter. A painful chapter that began with that crushing defeat in Madrid. And now, with one commanding performance, the narrative had completely changed. But the fan reaction was only the beginning. As celebrations spread across social media, tennis journalists and analysts began trying to understand exactly what they had witnessed. And many arrived at the same conclusion. This was no longer a surprise story. This was a serious tennis story. One analyst pointed out that Eala had now collected multiple victories against highly ranked opponents in an incredibly short period of time. Another noted that what stood out wasn't just the results. It was the manner in which those results were being achieved. The confidence. The composure. The willingness to take control of matches rather than simply react. Those qualities are rarely found in young players still adjusting to life on tour. Yet Eala was displaying them consistently. Others focused on something even more important. Momentum. Because momentum in tennis can be dangerous. A single breakthrough victory can change a season. Several breakthrough victories can change a career. And that's exactly what many experts believed was happening. The rankings, they argued, were finally beginning to reflect a level that had existed for much longer. For years, supporters had insisted that Eala possessed the talent to compete with the best players in the world. Now the results were finally supporting that belief. The discussion quickly expanded beyond Bad Homburg. Suddenly, analysts weren't talking about her next match. They were talking about Wimbledon. They were talking about possible draws. Potential upsets. And which seeded players would desperately hope to avoid seeing Alex Eala's name next to theirs. That conversation alone revealed how dramatically perceptions had changed. Just months earlier, opponents viewed her as a promising young player. Now many were beginning to view her as a genuine threat. And perhaps the most fascinating reaction came from commentators who focused on her mentality.